Okay, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today, I'm really thrilled and excited to have with me as my guest Jason Mendelson, who's a former lawyer and now musician, author, many other things, former venture capitalist. Jason, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jason, you definitely have one of the most interesting backgrounds I have ever seen for a lawyer. But let me just start by asking you why you went to law school in the first place.
I was a failed musician who had gotten a full ride to Michigan for music and then gotten injured and was no longer able to play. And so I graduated with a degree in economics. That's a whole story, but got no job. Nobody wanted to hire a person who'd only been a musician or an Office Max stock clerk. Apparently that wasn't very sexy. I managed to convince some guy at Accenture, which was Anderson Consulting at the time, to hire me as a software hacker because I had taught myself how to program, and he gave me a shot. And I spent a couple years as a software engineer and then decided I wanted to get back into music. And the best way to do that was going to be going to law school, becoming an entertainment lawyer, and getting somehow back into music somehow. So that's why I went to law school. That was also a terrible idea.
Interesting. Well, first of all, before we get into that, what was the music injury?
I didn't get hurt playing music. I got hurt playing intramural football at the University of Michigan on the actual big field back in the days when it was plastic concrete as opposed to the nice turf they have today. I landed wrong. I broke my wrist, all my fingers, my elbow, and blew out my nerve. So I was actually not able to move my right arm for about 6 months and had multiple surgeries. So that was the end of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So then back to lawyer now. So what happened to the entertainment lawyer career path? Because obviously that's not the way you went.
No, I didn't. I spent some time in LA with a whole bunch of entertainment lawyers, and I don't know how direct to be on this show, but it was not the type of law that I wanted to practice. The late nights, the substance abuse, the finding ways to rot every last dime out of your clients who are broken, poor, starving musicians. It just wasn't for me. So I went back to Michigan law, tail between my legs, thinking I was going to drop out. And then I started dating this woman who was from the Bay Area, and she told me about this thing called adventure capital, or at least that's what I had heard. And then I could go to the Silicon Valley with my long hair and blue jeans and potentially be a lawyer. And I said, well, it's not a bad backup plan. Let's give it a shot.
That's so funny. So you stumble into Silicon Valley. It doesn't sound like you knew much about that at all. And you started your career as a venture capital lawyer, it sounds like.
Yeah, actually, I got an internship my second year with Cooley, which was transformative.
Yeah.
And props to them for giving me the opportunity. They were amazing. They trained me up, and I was doing M&A in the group with Rick Kleiman, who's one of the Silicon Valley luminary. He and Keith Flaum were my mentors for M&A.
Wow.
But I really wanted to do venture. I had a software engineering background. I've got an entrepreneurial spirit, and I really wanted to work with entrepreneurs at the ground floor. And thankfully, your current colleague Bob Brigham at MLA gave me my first venture deal at Cooley and said, do you want to give this a shot? And I was like, and then I was hooked. So, I mean, you and I are connected in a lot of different ways.
That's so hilarious. So then, okay, so you had this career, and it sounds like venture capital started, it sounds like it suited you well. I mean, it sounds like it was a duck to water in a way.
Yeah, in fact, I would say duck to water, not only the VC practice, but Cooley was amazing. I assumed I would die at Cooley. I assumed one day I'd be a managing partner. I'd work my butt off.
Yeah.
I had zero complaints. One of those few junior lawyers who was incredibly grateful, incredibly happy.
Yeah.
But I had this client who kept trying to hire me, and it was a venture firm that I was representing. I said no the first time. I said no the second time. And then the third time they tripled my salary. And at some point, everybody has a number. I went to one of my mentors, Eric Jensen, a partner at Cooley, and I said, Eric, what do I do with this? And he looked at the offer letter and he looked up at me and said, if you don't take it, I will. So there was, and I'm like, you promise I can come back? You promise I can come back? He's like, you can always come back. Although I haven't, that was 20 years ago. So I'm not sure if that still stands. Eric, if you're out there, let me know if I can come back.
So then, and what year was this?
So that was 2000. It was literally right before the dot-com whole
Oh my
blow
God.
up. Like it,
Right.
it was the best frat party of all time. I was getting
Right.
hired at a firm called Mobius Venture Capital that had just raised $1.5 billion fund, which was, almost unheard of back then.
Yeah. Right.
What possibly could go wrong? I'm the GC and I'm going to do deals and I'm going to help companies
Right.
and it's going to be great. And then within like 4 months, I became like the undertaker, bankruptcy expert,
Yeah.
employment law.
Right. Right.
And, we got sued a bunch and it was a wild, wild ride.
So then obviously this is not the end of the story, but take
No.
me through what happens then. And I was there in 2001, so I know how this goes. So it was ugly. It was ugly.
Yeah. So, I had no illusions. I never wanted to be a VC. I'm like the only lawyer who went and joined a venture firm who doesn't secretly want to be a venture
Yeah.
capitalist. I
Yeah.
really like the intellectual practice of law, always have.
Uh-huh.
And, but I was getting put on boards of companies that were very troubled and they were like, hey, just don't get a suit.
Right.
Just be a good fiduciary. You know what that is. Maybe you can help them through the wind down. And a couple of the companies were able to turn around. In fact, one of the companies we pivoted to become one of the first e-discovery platforms. And it was a massive outcome. And the firm made a lot of money. And suddenly entrepreneurs were sending me business plans saying, hey, my buddy said you were on his board and you were a great VC. And will you look at my business plan? I'm like, hey, wait, I'm just a lawyer boy. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but as more, deal flow came, the firm was like, you have a green light. And so I started doing some deal work. And eventually that led to me co-founding a venture firm a number of years later.
So you're saying the firm that you joined, you went in as purely as a lawyer role, as a GC, but you ended up becoming an investment, like a general partner kind of role.
Yeah, I ended up I became the chief administrative officer. So all finance and everything reported into me, which was terrifying, right? Because lawyers are so good with math.
Yes.
And, but what's a few dollars here and there. And then I started doing deal work and then became a full GP at Mobius Venture Capital before I started my own firm.
Interesting. And so what do you think about you that made you such a good venture capitalist? Because it's definitely a very different skill from lawyer. I've interviewed a lot of lawyers who become venture capitalists. I've known a lot of lawyers. It's a very different skill set.
Well, yeah, because as an attorney, we are beaten to death about risk and mitigation, right?
Yes,
We are
right.
literally trained
Yes.
to be the opposite of a venture capitalist.
Yes.
A venture capitalist is all about risk.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
so depending on who you are, mitigation is either in your vocabulary or not at all, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you and I have both represented VCs. I'm sure you and I could have an entire podcast on the pardon my French, shit VCs say,
Yeah.
where we're shaking our head going, you can't possibly do that. I was able to make that transition from a risk mitigator to somebody who was comfortable with risk. And I will give 100% of that credit to my days as a professional musician many, many, many years before, where I actually had to support myself financially, picking up gigs, taking risks, placing bets on myself. I've been, financially independent since I was a teenager. And so those old skills really came back in a way that was super helpful, because I've known plenty of lawyers who have tried and failed as VCs because they haven't been able to fundamentally change their mindset.
Tell me about the kind of industries that really became your sweet spot, that really was like your core expertise, where you really excelled and had deep knowledge of.
Yeah, I'd say, from a VC standpoint, we functioned kind of interesting as a venture firm. We all invested in the same types of companies. What we did is we made ourselves a promise that we would not specialize insofar as what we had seen previously was you had a partner who did semiconductors and a partner who did this or two, and there wasn't a good cross language for doing diligence. And so we focused on consumer, B2B. We didn't do any biotech. We didn't do any life sciences. We didn't do any, quantum computing, although it was too early at that point. But sort of that core traditional VC market, Web 1.0, Web 2.0, whether it was, to consumer or business, that's what we all focused on. And we pushed each other really, really strong to all, to be equals. There were a couple music deals we did, which, myself and one of my partners who was interested in music, we looked at and we did. They didn't turn out well, ironically. But in general, we were staying in that sandbox.
Oh, interesting. So did you find that being a venture capitalist actually suited you better than being a lawyer? I mean, you obviously enjoy being a lawyer. What do you think?
It's funny. It's who's ever listening to this, it's October 27th, 2022. I have been retired from making money since March 2020. I retired from my venture firm. And I've had the last 2+ years to get back into music full time, do a lot. I've got a book out at criminal justice reform, but in the background, I've been spending trying to analyze where I have been most happy.
Yeah.
And I now finally figured it out. And this is like literally last month.
Okay.
I'm most happy when I honestly feel like I'm helping people.
Hmm.
I loved being a lawyer when I felt like I was truly helping people. I loved being an in-house lawyer, a general counsel that didn't have to bill people. I could spend as much time on anything as I wanted to help somebody. I loved the criminal justice reform stuff. I really liked being a VC. I loved helping the entrepreneurs. I loved helping them build things. But there was a lot that I didn't like. There was a lot of flash and TV and fame and social media and showing off stuff that doesn't need to be part of the ecosystem, but unfortunately is. So I think if you forced me, what still my happiest job has been, it's probably been a lawyer, even after all these years.
Yeah, interesting. Now, did you in 2020? Did you just go cold turkey and just stop being a venture capitalist completely, or did you kind of phase yourself out?
So I went mostly cold turkey. I was still on the board of Techstars, which was an accelerator that we co-founded. So I did that for another year. I had a lot of commitments as far as winding down particular, engagements, but I went pretty darn cold turkey. It was, fortunately, my 3 other co-founding partners were super gracious, and we had hired a couple other folks that took over some of the load. So that was great. But no, I wanted out. I made a decision, that I wanted out. I wanted to start anew. I call this the last third of my life, right? And I wanted to be something fundamentally different than what the first 2/3 was.
And did you decide that rather quickly, or had you planned 5 years before that? Okay, I'm going to do this for 5 more years.
No, I remember the first epiphany. I was in Florence, Italy with my wife in October of 2019, and I was walking down the street with her. I'll never forget. And I sort of stopped in my tracks, and I was like, whoa, it was like a lightning bolt hit me. And she's like, honey, what's going on? I'm like, I'm really happy. And she goes, oh, that's nice. And I'm like, no, I'm really, really happy. And I was like euphorically happy. And I don't normally run that way. And she'd ask me, well, when's the last time you felt like this? I'm like, well, our wedding day was pretty awesome. But I said consistently, actually probably back at law school. And it was sort of this epiphany of what do I need? What do I need from life? And I was happy enough. I'm not a depressive person. I don't run that way, but it caused me to really look inward and say, what am I missing? And I think what I found was I was missing a bigger sense of purpose. Being a VC is amazing. It's great, but I'm going to be honest, we weren't solving the world's issues. We weren't inventing vaccine discovery or platforms or stuff. And it was great. And I loved the people I worked with, but there was something missing for me. And so as I began to unwind that, I realized that I wanted to go back to my roots music, which has always made me happy and makes me deliriously happy. But also criminal justice reform had been something I've been working on deeply for 5 years. And I had started an organization with my wife, and then I ended up working for a year with the Attorney General here in Colorado and the governor on an initiative. And boy, that was making me really happy. And so I decided it was a short burn, but it was pretty clear.
Yeah, and you knew kind of what you wanted to do at the end of that road, or did it take a while to kind of figure out what you wanted to do?
I knew I wanted to do music, so I jumped in and I got an album out, which I'm super proud of, which we can talk about later. And I knew I wanted to dive in heavily to criminal justice reform. And as all things happen, passion will expand to the maximum amount of time. So I didn't really get a break, and that was okay because I was happy, but. I'm starting to think about maybe in 2023 taking a little more breath in the schedule. But we'll see what happens.
Tell me about this book you just wrote.
So first book was called Venture Deals: How to Be Smarter Than Your Lawyer in VC. My former partner Brad Feld and I wrote it, and it was such a success that I was like, okay, this book thing can work. I had been an adjunct professor at the University of Colorado Law School for 11 years and had seen the pain of my former students leaving law school and trying to manage in the real world. And I'm sure that you probably can go back and think about all the bumbleheaded things you did going from law school to your first job at VLG, right? Was that your first job? Or
not my first job, but it was early in my career. Yeah,
early. And look, it's not called lawyer school; it's called law school. And so I began to get this thesis that there should be a textbook, there should be a resource that just talks about this transition. It talks about the hard skills that law school doesn't teach you, but more importantly, soft skills, a lot around empathy and how clients think. And, how many junior lawyers have you and I heard say, oh, my client's an idiot.
Yeah.
It's because it's a lack of empathy. Their client isn't an idiot. But it's a true lack of empathy. And so I found 26 other people in my life who I respected from all walks of life, all ages, races, practice areas. And we wrote this book called How to Be a Lawyer on a bunch of different perspectives. And the idea, we just released it. It's just starting. It's on Amazon. Wiley's the publisher. We're just starting to promote it. The idea is it's for law school students and junior lawyers to hear from grizzled veterans about the dumb mistakes we made, so hopefully they don't make them. And also a classic chapter with clients, unedited, F-bombs included, lots of swear words about things they don't like about their lawyers, to give people to give them an idea.
Sounds like kind of a fun project, actually.
It was. It's definitely a passion project, and I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Tell me, what kind of musician are you?
I play a number of instruments. I'm still a pretty formidable drummer, even though post-injury, my arm's actually doing great. But I play guitar and bass. I play bass in a band. I sing keyboard and I write a lot. And I produce a lot. I'm trying to really make it as a songwriter. For those of you out there, I go by Jaceallen, Jaceallen. I'm on all streaming platforms. YouTube. And what I've done is I've married my love of philanthropy with music. So every time I bring out a music video, it supports a different organization. The first two did criminal justice organizations. I did a big fundraising for families displaced in Ukraine. I just released a song called Taking Sides, which is the title track of the album, which supports News Story, which is an organization that helps people build homes who normally wouldn't be able to afford them. And, right now I'm focusing on many, many different genres. So if you listen to the album, there's rock, there's country, there's EDM, there's alt soul. I did a couple of numbers with Paige Turner from The Voice when we were backed up by Beyonce's bass player and Bruno Mars's guitar player. So I'm feeling my way through. I've played every genre possible as a musician. I am, as a songwriter, trying to write as broadly as I can, throw things out there to see what people connect with. And, I'll start probably over the next year winnowing down maybe more on a particular genre, but I literally have something for everybody on it.
Now, let me ask you, you were a lawyer for startups. You obviously worked as a venture capitalist. How come did you think about trying to be an entrepreneur yourself and actually doing a startup? Tell me about that.
Well, I did. Thanks for, wow, what a great setup. So when I was the general counsel at Mobius, every time there was an M&A deal, there was a shareholder rep, right? There was a shareholder rep on the selling side. And guess who got to be that unpaid shareholder rep? You're looking at him. At me, I got to do that.
Right.
There was a particular case, a particular deal where the acquirer, 3 days after the due date for lobbying an escrow dispute claim, sends me the escrow dispute claim. It's 3 days late. And I'm like, hey, love your handwriting. Good job, guys. Missed the deadline. Sayonara, send over the money. Well, guess what? They said, no, we're suing you. And I'm like, for what? And they were basically trying to make a claim that I had not relied on this due date. Therefore, the due date was invalid and they could still make a claim on the escrow.
Okay.
I was like, you guys are a bunch of idiots, but I hired a lawyer. By the way, I had to hire a lawyer out of the money of Mobius's management fees. The amount of time this was taking of mine was massive.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I was hating it. I moved to Colorado during this to start my own venture firm. I was dealing with this. I went to the AT&T store to buy a new cell phone with a Boulder, Colorado cell phone number. And they said, sorry, Charlie, you can't have a new phone because you failed your credit check. And I'm like, how is that possible? Turns out that litigation was on my credit and I couldn't get a new cell phone. And I said, enough is enough. This is dumb. Somebody needs to start a company that does professional shareholder rep services. And I entitled it Shareholder Representative Services, not the best title, known as SRS Acquium for you folks out there who have used the services. And me and a co-founder, it's the biggest thing. It's the biggest shareholder rep service organization in the world. They do payments, they do M&A clearinghouse and platform. So I did get to scratch that bug. I got to ride that entrepreneurial journey in between Mobius and Foundry Group, which was the co-founding, there was this lull sort of in between that, and I did it, and I wouldn't trade that experience for the world.
Wow, that is really amazing. So what's left? I mean, you I mean, I'm not sure there is anything else left for you to do,
Oh
but
God, so much.
are there any things that left on your list, Jason?
Everything's left on my list. Um, everything. I mean, first of all, there's an infinite amount of things musically I want to do. You know, I've gotten to back up folks like Anders Osborne and Aloe Black and Judith Hill and Michael Kang from the String Cheese Incident recently on drums, pro gigs, nice venues. I mean, just doing that is amazing. I just opened a recording studio with Matt Sorum, the drummer from Guns N' Roses in Palm Springs, called Good Noise. I got that. Criminal justice reform. I am huge. My organization is called Breakthrough. We do an entrepreneurial training program in prisons, so when people get out, they don't go back. We have a 4.8% recidivism rate when the national average is like 50. I would love to become a photographer. I'd like to learn how to paint. I'd like to be in better shape. I would like somehow to get my cats to talk to me. So there's that. That's never going to happen. I just, the list, I mean, I want to be a great acoustic guitar player. I want to be a better bass player. I'd like to be a better husband. If, you know, I'm certainly not perfect. I'd like to try harder at that as well. There's so much. I'm going to die long before I'm bored.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, it also seems like, you know, when you moved on, like you don't look back and you don't miss being any of the roles you've had, right? I mean, it doesn't sound like you're just, you know, you've had that part of your life, but you're not, you know, thinking about it anymore.
Yeah, it's funny. You're the second person to mention that to me lately. When I was an econ major, which I found fascinating, but it was sort of like this last minute pivot from professional drummer to econ to graduate. I learned about opportunity costs. What is the opportunity cost of doing something? That was how it was presented to me as an economist. I think my best trait is knowing when I'm experiencing luck or opportunity. And I always ask myself, what is the opportunity cost of not making the change? I've always been wired that way. And so I look at all these changes and I just think is, you know, like I said, I could have not gone to the venture firm, but Cooley was like, come back anytime you want. What's the opportunity cost? Zero. What's the opportunity cost of starting a, you know, SRS? Really nothing. What was the opportunity cost of me leaving venture? Not much either. I'm, you know, one of the best-selling authors of all time in this space, and I know, you know, I remember all my limited partners well. If I wanted to do it, I could go raise a fund, but I don't want to do it. So maybe it makes it easy that I feel, and maybe I'm deluding myself. I don't know. I can feel like I can always go backwards. That gives me the strength to always be going forwards.
Well, Jason, this has been an amazing conversation. I really enjoyed it. I can't wait to check in with you in a few years and see what else you're doing.
Hopefully it's receiving a Grammy, but we'll see. That I put that low on the possibility list, but it was a true pleasure to be here today.
This is Richard Hsu and Jason Mendelson. Thanks.